Super Monday session. This is Beril. I'm a publishing manager at Supersonic. Today, I'm here to give you some tips for a genre that we see that it has been on the top charts since the beginning of hyper-casual rise. It's actually not hard to guess what we will be discussing today. Of course, it's runners. We all have few runner games that on our phones that we play here and there and enjoy exploring their different themes and concepts. Of course, I have some too. Even soon, we'll be diving into the runner and we will see how it actually become a top chart star. But if you're ready to turn your runner into a stunner, stay with us, get all the tips and tricks for your next runner prototype. So today in our super special runners episode, first we'll start by going over tips and trends for runner games in order to guide you for your next runner prototype. Then we will be talking about our star, Build a Queen, and what makes it a success and how to be inspired from it. Like always, we'll be finishing it out with our Q&A session. So from now on, please start leaving all of your questions down below, and I'll be answering all of them at the end of our session. So let's start by going over some of our tips for your next runner prototype. When we dive into runners, we see that they come up with good and strong marketability potential. Besides that, you can also relate that whenever we actually check the top charts, there's always a trending runner there. So what makes them special? The first thing is that by using the right creatives, it's much, much easier to reach a low CPI with these type of games. We can easily see that they are one of the most marketable genres in the all hyper-casual market. However, we also need to keep in mind that throughout the years, like the market, also runners also went through an evolution and change. And today we can say that they're divided into different types of runners. Let's start with the gate runners. These type of runners have been trending over 3 years now. Mob Control was one of the pioneers with the multiplier mechanic. Then we saw the strong marketability in Tolman Run, where the character goes through a gate and we see an instant visual change on the character's height. The last but not least is Build a Queen, which is another good example where you can create your own queen by passing through different gates with picking absurd body parts. And what they actually all have in common is that all of these gates runner have an instant visual change and growth that actually attracts the player's attention. And besides that, it's important to note that all of these games include interesting concepts. So by using the right creatives, it brought them a nice marketability. So it's all about mix and matching. Another type of runner that we see on the top charts lately is hybrid runners. This is also something we see on the trends. These games might have a little bit less marketability compared to a classic hyper-casual, but we definitely see a better and stronger in-game metrics compared to regular ones. As mentioned earlier, in order to work on the marketability side, focusing on games on the creative side can help you actually find a low CPI, since players like the evolution of the object visually while they play. Also, we know that concepts plays a major role on the marketability side. So before you actually start on your ideation process, please don't forget to check our latest markets trend report, which is available on our Knowledge Hub. I'm sure it will help you to reach the marketability and the CPI you're looking for. I think the most important question we need to ask ourselves is like, okay, why do these games actually perform well on playtime and retention compared to classic runners? We can summarize these in like 3 main points. The first is, of course, the progressive economy that you create while you play. You do upgrade in these type of runners, but it's pretty slow. This creates an urge in the player to watch more RV and increase the upgrades or get in-app purchases to boost their progression. The second is the mid-level gates. While you're upgrading and creating a progression, there's an ongoing decision-making process where you need to swipe and pick the right gates to create enough progression. And the last but not least will be the blocks that are added at the end of the level, which is in the level end. This creates a great satisfaction and the player where they get one step closer to their reward. And when you look at good and strong runners like this, you'll be able to see that most of the teams are in weapons and bullet side. So obviously, this is a path we can try these concept, but it's also worth trying different teams that actually can grab players' attention. Some more tips. Runners are still the most common way to get marketability score 4 and 5, and to create hyper-casual gameplay that can scale on the Supersonic platform. From the initial testing phase, you get a marketability score from 1 till 5. 1 means low marketability, 5 means extremely marketable. So we can easily say that 4 and 5 means high marketability. Aside from that, selecting a strong theme is super important. I've been telling this many times, I know, but it's really important. So make sure to come up with tons of ideas and select the best ones out of it. Keep it simple. Keeping it simple is also works in the creative side, showing gameplay and the goal with the minimum assets. Instead, let's try to focus on the visual changes and the progression by using the stacking and the gate mechanism. And if you're looking to create hybrid runners, we can also try to integrate new and extra layers to the game. This why while you keep a low CPI game, it will be much easier to create game progression and lead to a higher in-game metrics in terms of playtime and retention. And last but not least is, in my eyes, the most important point is to make sure your ideas are coming from a reference to a recent game that actually was published or was on the top charts, that we know that it worked and showed potential. So sometimes it feels like coming up with an idea that nobody worked before or saw before is an excellent and a great way to be on the top charts. However, we know that in the hyper-casual market, we see the same things all over again, like the same concepts, same mechanics, but the magic is actually how you mix and match them and how you integrate your game. So time to go over a success story, which is Build a Queen. It was launched at the end of August, and since then, 6 months have passed, and we still see Build a Queen staying on the top charts. If we go back to the early testing, we will see the strong marketability from the first steps. We get marketability score 4 on Supersonic's marketability tool. How do we get there? We tested on 4 different networks, which was back then on Facebook, TikTok, Ironstones, and Unity. You can easily see that the game was pretty strong in socials, but also on the SDK networks. Overall, the marketability was super strong. So in most of the games, we see one side stronger than the other, which is either CPI or the LTV. However, this time we actually saw that it's possible to achieve both at the same time. It's not impossible. Here you can also see that aside from the marketability potential, the KPIs were really strong for a classic hyper-casual runner. From in-game perspective, we were able to grow the numbers pretty well. Almost 2,000 seconds on day 0, almost 4,000 seconds on day 7 APAPU. And for the ones who are not familiar with the term APAPU, it's basically something created by Supersonic, which stands for average playtime per user, as a more accurate prediction of your game's LTV. And aside from the playtime, we can see that the retention was pretty strong too. On day 1, it's 38%. On day 7, it's nearly 10%, which is, again, not something we see regularly in classic hyper-casual games. So this definitely showed us the potential of the game from the beginning. And again, like, why did it work? If we dive into whys, we can say that we can start by saying we have an engaging mechanic, which leads to higher marketability potential with low CPI and high in-game metrics, where we see high engagement throughout the game, even on the 7th day. The interesting mechanic comes from matching different type of body parts by letting people actually decide which gate to pick, which also applies to a larger group of audience. And here, as you can see from the graph, when you have a really strong marketability, which is marketability score 4 and 5, the other side actually takes the pie, will be the in-game metrics. Once you have a lower marketability, which once we go down, basically what we need to reach is a higher LTV, which comes with higher playtime and retention. We can see that it's always a give and take situation. If we go back to our success story, Build a Queen, both sides were really strong. Marketability score was 4 and in-game metrics were pretty high, and marketability score 3 could have even compensated the 38% retention. So this gave us definitely confidence to move forward with the game. This is also for your side. This is when you need to know and what to expect and what to aim from your game. and how to move forward. So it's definitely a helpful graph to know how to move forward with your game. And the breakdowns are really helpful by Supersonic with the marketability score, and really makes the things easy to comprehend from the beginning, which starts from the initial testing phase. But it's also important to remember that LTV always has to be higher than the CPI as a benchmark. Only continue working on your prototype if you know, or you can actually forecast that you have a higher LTV than the CPI. Please take into consideration that CPI increases in test as you increase the budget, which means you might start with a lower CPI, but while you're working on the game, it's highly likely that your CPI will spike up. So the previous slide helps you to understand where to stand, because with each game, you can understand what kind of KPIs are needed for you to move forward. You should always remember, no matter what, LTV needs to be higher than the CPI, and this needs to be a thumb rule that we should keep while we're testing our games. Now we can dive deep into our iteration process, and how and why actually this game Build a Queen turned into a hit and stayed on the top charts for a while. First of all, we can start with the core gameplay, which plays a vital role in a game to be sticky and attractive. Like we mentioned earlier, runner is a wide genre that by picking the right concept, it's possible to target a wider audience, which definitely helps us while we scale the game. In our case, it was building a queen's body parts, and most importantly, absurd sizes, which really interested the players and attracted their attention. On the other hand, Gate Runner brings with itself a decision-making mechanism where the player can easily see and predict how their decision will be affecting them, which makes them feel that they're in charge of the game. They're deciding, and they can see how their decision will turn into an action. And additionally, the game includes a stacking mechanism where you can pick different hairstyles. Another important part to boost the in-game is to add mini games after a few levels to keep players entertained. In our case, it was a makeover in the middle of the runner, where we introduced brushes, eyeshadows, and lipsticks to keep players actually engaged and entertained. And this actually allowed the game to be less repetitive and more engaging. And this was something we tried during our A/B testing process, and we saw that it increased our playtime and retention, so why not keeping it? Another major point is to boost in-game metrics, which is strong meta. We added first the idle construction, where our main character can unlock a room in several levels where she can purchase beds, desks, with these pieces, decorate her room in the upcoming levels. And after the 6th level, we introduced the option to get a pet, which came out of the ads. So the third part was the dialogues. We put a character at the end of the level that waits for our queen while she's in the beauty contest. And by adding the dialogues, we allowed him to praise her and push the game progression. And in terms of monetization in the game, you can see that it's mostly dependent on RVs, which is rewarded ads. And in classic hyper-casual games, we're mostly used to seeing interstitials rather than RVs, which also makes this game a bit more special. Here, you can see how the game actually looked and evolved from our initial testing prototyping phase from the latest gameplay that you can see while you're playing the game. At the beginning, the gates were only including human body parts, where the character stacks and changes her own body shape. The instant and absurd visual changes allowed the game to reach strong marketability. However, during the iteration process, we have realized that the gameplay and the artwork was really limited for us to create needed progression in the future levels. So we changed our direction to makeup theme. In the new version, the players were able to collect makeup products and run for a beauty contest. And at the end of the level, basically this allowed us to keep the strong marketability and boost the in-game metrics by keeping the visual changes that attracts the players. In the first 2 iterations, the target was more to focus on the marketability side. So the actual iteration, which means making the major changes in the core gameplay, started from the 3rd iteration. From the 3rd on, we added separate lane on the side where the 2 characters can run at the same time, and our character runs on the other side, which is competing with the AI character who runs and competes for the beauty contest. Besides that, in the prototype phase, some body parts were scary objects like long necks, long hands, or fluffy body parts that would talk to a smaller audience group. So we made the changes by adding more beauty levels, dresses, and included anything that with hairstyles. And after these 3 different implementation, the playtime increased a bit from 900 seconds to 1,100 seconds. However, we saw a really nice increase in the retention part, which was from 10% to 24%, which showed us that we found the right direction and we were on a nice path. Of course, A/B test makes everything better. The more you try different variants, it allows us to see what worked for the players and make the game more challenging to increase the playtime and obviously retention. We started by extending the levels, which helped us to increase the playtime by 300 seconds and retention by 11%. The next variant was to rotate the elements, which allowed us to increase the playtime by 200 seconds and retention by 4%. Mini games also worked compared to our control group, same as the level order adjustment. In the beginning, levels weren't looking good and they weren't really on order. Players were asked to pick body parts of animals, which we decided to decrease this option and only show it after the 15th level and replace with pretty and nice looking dresses. Because we already know this is something works for a wider group of audience and attracts the player's attention, so why not to implement it? And overall, testing 3 different variants helped us to increase the playtime from 1,100 seconds to 1,600 seconds, and retention from 24% to 32%, which was a pretty good start. Here, you can see the Supersonic's A/B testing tool on how these different variants actually worked over the control variant on the Android side and increased the APAPO. And we can see that it's getting stronger and we're on the right path. The same changes were implemented on the iOS side. You can see that just like Android, these variants worked over the control group. So everything is perfect. We're ready to move to the next iteration. So when we moved to work on winning content, which means just increasing the amount of content that actually we know works and our players like to consume. In our case, it was about increasing the pets, dress-up levels, meta items, mini games, and adding a new tutorial for the beginning for players to actually know how to lead the game. And new tutorials actually really helped the player to understand the game better. They all worked and increased the metrics even more on the playtime side. It increased by 300 seconds and retention by 6%. These metrics, especially the retention, is not, as I mentioned earlier, is not something that we see in regular classic hyper casual runners, especially when it's combined with a really, really strong marketability. Therefore, we decided that it was the right time. And the game metrics were in a good place to actually start adding ads, which means that iteration process ends and we move to our advanced testing process. We started by implementing classic hyper-casual ad strategy. It turns out that after we added the RVs and interstitials, the average RV impression were a bit low, which was between 1 to 2. Average number we expect to see is between 3 to 4, which 1 to 2 was below average. And after making a small research on how to increase these impressions, we decided to add more female features to the game. And on the 7th iteration, we implemented a fairy RV with a timer. The players were helping a little girl, which made the RV itself more female related. Then we followed by offering more choices, so the player wouldn't feel forced to watch RVs. If the player doesn't watch the RV or doesn't want to watch it, they still have the option to keep playing. So we made sure we weren't really oppressive on that aspect and scared the player. Sparkling RV gates were introduced on the 4th level when the RV was placed in the middle of the runner. So if they choose to watch the RV, then the mermaid will get into a bonus runner, which was something players like to see. And while we're working on the RVs, we also improved our artwork to make the gameplay more visually attractive. Like, as you can imagine, female-related teams needs more artwork. And the game had 70% of female audience, so this was something needed to be implemented. And all this hard work actually paid off, and we managed to double our RV engagement from 1.5 to 3. And of course, that wasn't enough for us because we're looking for perfect, so we wanted to try more. On the 8th iteration, we went for a new gameplay and aimed to avoid the repetition. We know that once a player reaches 10th, 20th level with the same gameplay, and if we don't introduce anything new, then it's high likely that we will lose their interest. And of course, we wanted to avoid this situation. So what we did was to keep the same exact level play. However, introduced a new theme levels, and by offering them something new and different. We allowed players to get different features depending on the theme, dress, hair, or makeup products. This way, they felt each level was unique. Besides that, we also introduced classic characters like vampire, a ballet dancer, that won't cause us any IP issues in the future. And these changes luckily worked and increased the RV impression from 3 to 5. And we managed to go over the average impression in terms of RV engagement. And we were able to keep the strong marketability as well as the gameplay. And this was basically our last iteration before we move on to our global launch and staying on the top charts for a while. And after seeing that Build a Queen worked and stayed on top charts since its launch, I think we can dive into some conclusions and say what are to-dos and not to-dos in a runner game. It works for all type of games actually, but also in runners, it's mandatory to use a strong theme. In our case, it started as body parts and during iterations evolved to a makeup, which allowed us to attract a more wide audience group. Once the makeup concept merged with the runner, the theme, it gave us a strong and nice marketability and gave us confidence to move forward one step further with the game. We added more meta features. This has a direct positive correlation to boost your in-game metrics. And in order to create the Queen's Room, we increased the number of pets and we added more dialogues, and we actually saw that players were staying in the game more and increasing the playtime. And of course, the most important point is to know your audience and give them what they want and what they're pursuing from the game. We knew our audience were mostly female, so we introduced makeup elements. Last but not least is to create challenges, but offering solutions to these type of challenges by implementing the RVs. This way, we give first the frustration feeling to the player that they're actually failing, and then the happiness and the fulfillment when the RV actually helps them to complete and finish the level with a success. If we move on to our don'ts, make sure not to work on teams concepts that will include small group of audience. Otherwise, it will be hard to find the right and loyal users that we're looking for and the right amount once we actually scale with the game and go further. Last but not least is to use the images that may back the players a bit. Make sure follow the ethics and store regulations, and still keep in mind your players could be sensitive to these topics. As usual, I spoke a lot, but there was a lot to share with you. We already know that one of you listening to us today might be the next developer for our next hit runner game. So it's important to give you all the tips and share our journey with you, how we actually turn this runner into a stunner. Stage is yours. Please share all of your questions with me, and I'll be answering them.